So thank you, Thomas and Zan, and thank you to the organizers. This is my second Metabesity conference, which I believe actually is the second Metabesity conference. And at the first one in London, just about 2 years ago, Thomas and Zan assigned me a role that I actually never had at a meeting, but I guess after 30 years as a consultant, you get to do the so what moment, right? So I considered it a bit flattering of an invitation, but also a bit of a pain in the rear end, because what they asked me to do was summarize 2 days of what I heard. And that forced me to pay attention, for 2 days and stay in the audience and not take notes. So very clever guys, it worked out well. I was struck by, first of all, two things. One, we have literally no time for this discussion. But I was struck by the contrast where I was asked to sum up in London the things I'd heard. And it would be very easy for me to say here, I know what I didn't hear. Okay, and so far what we haven't heard, and I did attend most of the sessions, not all of them, is how are we going to pay for the innovation? Okay, I've heard some predictions made. I've heard Brian Kennedy actually put up a prediction that said that, I think it was several years from now, that it'll be easier to treat aging than chronic disease. I think that's an incredibly appealing vision. It might be appealing to payers too. We're going to hear about that and talk about that a little bit. But frankly, I really think this little panel, this little fireside chat, which will be over before we know it, should really be entitled "The Elephant in the Back Seat," because this is the elephant in the back seat, right? It's that how are we going? So I'm struck by two questions, and before I turn it over to Ryan, who can introduce himself because he actually knows something about this. The first question is, how will we afford to pay for all of this? And then the corollary question to that is, how can we afford not to pay for it? All right? And there is a lot of innovation that we can very easily do without, that we can very easily not pay for. But I think some of the things that struck me listening to some of the presenters was exactly the opposite. How can we afford not to do this? If you look at the constellation of numbers, and you look at, excuse the metaphors, terrible things going on in Japan right now with the typhoon, but if you look at the tsunami of costs that's going to hit all developed economies, and perhaps developing economies, I'm not sure how we can afford not to. The question is, the devil's in the details, and how is it going to happen? So I'm delighted to have Ryan Walsh from Real Endpoints. I'll allow Ryan to just briefly establish his credentials and what his firm does. But we collaborate a lot, and it's very interesting that we do, because at Cello Health BioConsulting, which was previously Defined Health, our focus is on working with early-stage science-driven companies on issues of strategy. We never really thought about the pricing and market access reimbursement risk until about 10 years ago. And 5 years ago, it was on everyone's plate, and now it's in every boardroom, and it's in every investor session. So my suggestion to the organizers of this fabulous conference is that we have an hour and a half to dig into these issues, and this be a continual theme, so that where we're talking about all this innovation, we're also ensuring that we can talk about access. So I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you. So, I think Ed set it up really well. So where our organization, or my organization that I'm currently with now, Real Endpoints, picks up is really where Ed's team starts to do a bit of a handoff. And so we do work collaboratively with mutual clients on the manufacturer side, but we are entirely focused on market access. And so what I'd encourage everyone to think about, and as you continue your discussions today and then move beyond, is that we're in a really great point in time for development, for scientific discovery, and the ability to bring that to the market and the masses. And so what we talk about, and really what you should think about, is not just the strict discipline of payer coverage as a function of pricing and reimbursement and traditional contracting, but market access, and what does that mean for a particular product or in a particular disease state. And that's certainly includes the reimbursement, the coverage, and the accessibility of a drug, but it also goes much broader. So how do patients and providers access particular products? How do they build those into treatment protocols for patients. What is the point of dispensing that a patient will access the drug? Is it through a retail channel? Is it through a specialty pharmacy? Is it through something completely disruptive and non-traditional like a pill pack or some other distribution channel? And then what are the services and support that are designed to really help the patient be successful in a particular category or on a particular drug? And all of those are redefining this notion of managed care as something horrible in the marketplace that must be contended with, to the strategy around market access, and really working backwards from the patient experience through the supply chain, the reimbursement, and all the way back to the manufacturer's development plan. I think, maybe something that Ed and I were talking about earlier today, which underscores, I think, the transformation in how you think about access and coverage and reimbursement is really the nature of the evolution with the payer themselves. So historically, and still in large part today, there were a myriad of siloed entities within the healthcare delivery continuum. You had health plans working against one set of objectives, largely focused on more of the medical side. You had the proliferation of PBMs, who were almost entirely focused on pharmacy benefit management, really managing pharmacy spend to a budget for a plan sponsor. Then you had pharmacies working completely in silos and unintegrated into some of these larger entities, and that's retail and specialty. And now you see really the marketplace is defined by probably less than 10 and maybe 6 very large integrated customers who are managing the health benefits for hundreds of millions of patients in the US. United Healthcare and Optum, Cigna ESI, Aetna and CVS Caremark. These are fully integrated vertical entities that have the ability to control coverage and access to care end to end. So they have a health plan integrated with a PBM. They have a wholly owned specialty pharmacy, which is designed to really enforce the compliant delivery of drugs against a formulary that they've designed for a plan sponsor. They have strategic alliances or integration of wholesalers and distributors, and then a retail component where they can really optimize the site of care and delivery for patients. And then there's ancillary services like infusion networks and retail clinics where you have a primary care staff model, things like that. And so thinking about how to lean into that transformation on the payer side, I think, is really critical when you continue to further these discussions that you've all been having about transforming care and wellness and how patients access drugs to really transform disease.
Thanks, Ron.
That was a long answer.
So it's a great answer. So I didn't get the opportunity to do what I actually wanted to do because I forgot, was to ask the audience for a show of hands, is how many people represent some sort of payer function or insurance company, or any hands up there? One hand. Okay, you can come up.
We didn't even think we'd get one.
You can come up and join us.
You ruined the joke.
We never even. You killed but it's one. Okay, it's pretty small.
And how brave of you to raise your hand.
And raise your hand, and congratulations on coming to this meeting. May many people you work with come to this meeting as well. The other question I'd like to ask, how many people are here from large pharmaceutical companies? Okay, that's a few more, but it's still distinctly the minority. So I'm going to submit to you that until 2 issues, we start to make real significant progress on 2 issues, all right? One is going to be, what is the clinical development strategy broadly as we think through the anti-aging field? And I think this, that's been rife for discussions and everything else. And I think this point, and I'll make the point later on the panel with the emerging companies, because I think the important question is how, what is the de-risking moment for pharma? Okay, what's it going to take to de-risk? I'm not going to ask Ryan the second part of that question, although he probably has an answer. But our experience in working through fields like immuno-oncology and gene therapy is very instructive, because literally hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of invested capital chased opportunities and pursued science in that field. But the investor side and the pharma side was utterly uninterested until there was, in the case of immuno-oncology, a single de-risking moment, which was the ipilimumab phase 3 data. So, if you actually, in melanoma, so if you actually think about applying that to a field that's this big and has this many approaches, that's a challenge. But since we only have a few minutes, I just want to say the one thing I did hear, okay, a lot of, and I'm gonna throw this question at Ryan, is there are kind of the exemplar molecules that are being studied here. The two of them I hear the most about are metformin, okay, and the other one a little bit less, but the other one is rapamycin, right? There may be others, presumably there are others, and I don't mean to disrespect those who are pursuing work on others, but that's what you hear about the most. Now, what those drugs have in common, mechanistically very little, but what they have in common is they're both about 50 years old, all right? And that means they're cheap and cheerful and generic. So what I hear when I listen here through my lens is I hear a little bit of the first challenge this field is going to have to, is it's fine to use, exemplar compounds to pursue the science, but from a payer world and from the world that you live in, an expensive metformin doesn't look like a really good deal. So how do you see this kind of shaking out?
Yeah, I think there's challenges to that, and so the component parts are really around access, and so when we were talking about this earlier, Ed had mentioned that Janet Woodcock had expressed that she loves kind of redevelopment and science built on proven assets, and I think payers, for probably many of the same reasons, do as well. There's known safety profiles, there are known benefits. They're typically, when you see that type of development, it's in categories that are somewhat established, so they're not trying to find their bearings like you might have in a new category with either cell and gene therapy or even more practical in an area like NASH. I think the challenge really becomes not will a payer cover it, but at what cost and price will they cover and provide access. And so if you've got a molecule like metformin that has been around and established and has price points that are well established and budgeted for in the marketplace, transforming that and quadrupling or raising the price tenfold is typically not something that payers are going to reward or even tolerate. And so you see it really becomes an unknown, kind of unbudgeted cost for the payers, and it's largely indefensible when you're sitting down and really talking about a value proposition that we've taken this older wine, put it in a new bottle, and now we want to increase the price and we demand that you provide access to it. And I think the payer's response would be, sure, we'll provide access to it if the science in the outcomes are sound, but certainly not at a price that is astronomically higher. And so there's the commercialization challenge, and I think strategy that needs to be considered as you're developing assets like that, and thinking about what the potential commercial opportunity is.
So one question we often get asked, I'm going to ask this last question and move it to the audience, and I'm going to actually ask it to Ryan, because we get asked from a strategic side all the time, how early is it too early to think about some of these things? For goodness sake, we're really early. This field is indeed very early. I know there are some emerging companies and some on the panel we moderated later that are actually in late phase trials, like Restore Bio. But for the predominant number of you in this room, this field is very, very early. And it is by necessity scientifically driven, and the conversations are, well, when is it time to start having these conversations? Is it feasible and okay to wait for proof of concept? Because one of the things I worry about is that given the cost of development that you would assume would be in this space, then unlike some of the companies that are working in rare diseases or monogenetic disorders, it's probably not feasible to do this without cooperation from pharma companies. So, and yet I don't think the pharma companies are asking these questions yet. So when should the innovative companies be wrestling with this, and how much of a position and leadership do you think they need to take?
I think there's a couple I wouldn't be naive enough to say at the outset, step one, phase one of development, your primary focus should be market access and how payers are going to think about you. I think the earlier you are, I think it is never too early to be educated on a significant stakeholder or group of stakeholders in the success of bringing a product to market and delivering it to appropriate patients. And where we struggle on behalf of and with many of our clients, large global pharma with broad portfolios, Fortune 50 type companies, all the way down to smaller companies that have never commercialized a drug, is part of the challenge is just a fundamental lack of understanding of the business model and drivers of what facilitates access. What do payers care about? What will they cover in value? And how can we present a compelling value proposition for our product? So I think educating and being knowledgeable about the marketplace is just something that everyone should always challenge themselves to. And the analog that we give when we get that question is, how early do you start thinking about how providers will use this product? How early do you think about their pathway from a clinical perspective and from a treatment perspective? And why wouldn't you think about everyone else who is going to supply that therapy to that provider to give to that patient and what their needs are in healthcare delivery? So it doesn't have to always be a go, no-go decision if payers are going to think favorably of your product, because market access strategy can help you in those areas where you don't have strong payer coverage. But I think really, that challenge to be knowledgeable and educated about the diversity and the uniqueness of particularly the major healthcare providers and payers in the U.S. is something that really can't happen early enough, because it is important to the development process.
So I just want to make one comment, and I'll get to the questions, and we'll wrap up maybe 2 minutes late if we can. So I just want the clarifying comment is that this is a very U.S.-centric discussion we're having up here. A lot of the data that was presented was U.S.-centric. However, there's been data to look at this on a global basis, and we realize that in the U.S. system, this discussion is infinitely more complicated than it is in single-payer systems. And I don't want to get into the political side of it, but at some point we're riding right along with transformation within the U.S. system. And I think all serious observers certainly expect that. So we will see some opportunity to harmonize as this system simplifies. But it is before it simplifies, it's actually getting a little bit more complex, which is interesting. So Thomas, I see you over there, but I'm not going to let you use host prerogative. So I'm going to call on this gentleman over here, and then we'll finish up with these 2 questions. If you have another one, get online quickly.
Well, thank you, but I am from Connection also.
Well, then he's going to use CEO perspective on you. So.
He's a big shot. Well, I have a few comments on these very important questions. First of all, the reason we see as a consultant there is a lot of work going on gene therapy and things like that, there is a reason for that. Because there are a lot of failures in treatment for diseases which are sort of age-related. I worked in FDA for almost 30 years, so I can give you my personal experience. For example, MMP inhibitors, stromolysin inhibitors. Companies have spent more than $10 billion, 10 years of work, it has not given any fruitful answer, okay? And osteoarthritis is a very important thing worldwide. And we need a medicine that improves the joint, not just the pain, okay? So the point of drug development, there are efforts to, but there are failures. That's the whole reason they are twisting. But I'm not getting into that. The issue here is some of the products which have been reformulated and marketed got approval. I'm just giving you one example, say EpiPen. It was reviewed in the same division I last worked. Now, we did not think about the pricing of the product. We gave the activity of the product, efficacy of the product, side effects of the product. It is the commercial vendor who, whatever way they did, their pricing. But to the society, that product is very important. And so the issue here is, what I understand from your discussion is the economic factors related to this product development. My suggestion to all of us here is when you do a study, future studies on metformin for the age-related changes or whatever it is, do a good study and publish it. That will be acceptable to the regulatory agency. It's a very important issue because you can submit a paper NDA which will be very inexpensive and you can market the product in a more inexpensive way. And that's what is lagging somehow. That's my comment.
Thomas, we're up against the end. Do you want to comment on that?
No,
Okay.
sorry.
Thomas, we're up against the end.
So we don't have the time to discuss this, but there are companies that are working on age-related indications. Joan, I don't want to call you out here, but if you're in phase 3, obviously you've been thinking about reimbursement issues. Charles, I don't know where you are in the room, but if you're in phase 2 for Alzheimer's, the distinguishing feature, though, of these companies is that they are pursuing specific disease areas, which, and therefore more traditional approaches are appropriate. The more interesting question is, what do you do when you have a product that you're proposing to sell to basically healthy people with the promise that it's going to keep them healthier 30 years down the line? And who's going to pay for that, and how's that going to be priced? And I know there are interesting ideas in the room about subscription models and so forth, but, oh, sorry, no, you have...
I have permission to say something. I know you
Sure.
but, you know, I'm an academic healthcare professional from the UK, but I did actually sit on the reimbursement authority for 11 years and develop some of the things. And it's so easy for us. You're quite right. You know, if the incremental cost-effectiveness ratio is there, i.e. cost per quality, then provided the data's there on the hard outcomes, which are the things which actually save the money, of course, not diabetes, but real disease. Forgive me, Will. Then we will simply put it into the guidelines. And, you know, in a sense, I always have terrible trouble with US healthcare funding.
We do too.
But what you're talking about is your complex system, not against the reality of cost of healthcare for cost of medication.
That's a very good comment. Thank you so much. I think we are pretty much flat out of time. So next time we only beg to be make this a bigger discussion but I think the very value of just introducing this in this crowd and in this meeting and sensitizing all of you to it, hopefully we will have made it worthwhile for us to do this. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.